Now this is the Rockingham gate to my home. It's west of the house. We actually used it as an exit. And it was on this street, Rockingham, that Alan Park drove up that night of the 12th. And Alan Park was pretty consistent in his testimony, and as well as what he told the police in the first interview that he did throughout the trial. And Marcia Clark was almost as consistent with her misrepresentation of this person's testimony. And it seems strange to me that the press, or many of the pundits around the country, chose to go with Marcia's misrepresentations instead of Alan Park's actual testimony. One thing Alan said was when he drove up this street, he didn't notice any cars on Rockingham, and he did not notice a Bronco. He didn't notice it when he drove up. He didn't notice it at one point when he drove down the middle of the street. Curiously, not along the curb when he wanted to look through this gate to see if he can see anyone in my house. I submit that he came back in the middle of the street because the Bronco would have blocked him riding along the curb. But he also, more importantly, stated that he didn't notice this Bronco when he drove out of the Rockingham gate at a time when I think everybody agreed that the Bronco was there. I find very interesting that if this Bronco was parked askew, as the police time and time again stated. Now you look at this parking job. I mean, you'd have to be, I mean, with the parking police to say that this is a bad parking job. This is a truck, and I submit it'd be pretty difficult to drive up and park a car much better than this parking job. A couple of other points about this Bronco is that a lot of talk about the mixed blood stains that were on the console. You realize there was only 0.7 of one drop of blood on that console. I can literally sneeze in my hand, rub it around that console, and you would probably have more DNA. Another incident that came about because of the Bronco, and I found it very indicative of everything that happened in this case and how members of the media and pundits around this country were so quick to jump on any negative, anything that may have made me look more guilty. Was this body bag, this plastic bag, and this shovel that they found in the back of my Bronco. Now, they investigated this case for 7 months, 7 or 8 months before we got to trial. They said it was an exhaustive investigation. Yet, that Friday, they showed the jury, they sprang in front of the jury and the nation, this plastic bag, which they tried to imply could have been used as a body bag, and this shovel that was in the back of my car. And of course, the media that weekend just went wild with it, and I would assume most of the people around the country who thought I was guilty say, see, what did I tell you? Well, over the weekend, they discovered that this plastic bag came with every Bronco. It was standard equipment. It came, it had something to do with the spare tire, and of course the shovel was not a shovel that you would use to dig holes. It was a mucking shovel that you would use to pick up stuff. In my case, we call it a pooper scooper, and I actually had it in the back of my car because I was going over to Nicole's house. She was having some trouble with the neighbor to the north of her because the dogs were, you know, doing their due around there, and this disgruntled ex-husband was going over there picking up the dog due for her. Let's go back in and some other interesting things that I can point out to you out here. Some of it has to do with this driveway. Before I show you some blood drops that were found on the property, let's talk a little about some of the evidence and things that came out in court. One, that you cannot age blood drops. You can't really tell when they were deposited. For instance, 2 blood drops were found here side by side, and you really couldn't tell when, if they were deposited at the same time or not. One thing is curious to me, that these were side by side, which would indicate someone was bleeding from 2 sides of their body, I guess. As we go down the driveway, we have cards where they found various blood drops. Here's one here, and then there's other cards going towards the front of the house. One thing that really jumps out at you is that none of these blood drops go in this direction to the side of the garage where Mark Fuhrman allegedly found the bloody glove. Some other points I should make about the blood. All the blood drops going along the side of Nicole's house towards her alley, the blood drops that are on this driveway going in various directions to or from my front door, the blood-splattered Bronco, my blood-splattered home. All of this blood constitutes less than 15 drops of blood, less than 15 drops. Now, when you talk about the estimated 1.5 cc's of blood that was missing from the blood vial, that would constitute something like 30 drops of blood. And when you talk about that blood vial, Philip Van Adder, an experienced investigator, for the first time in his career, decided to bring the blood vial from downtown, where he could have booked it, out here to my home when he didn't even know if Dennis Wong would still be here. I find that very unusual. Since we're out here, let's talk about some observations that Alan Park may have had. This is my car. It's a Bentley. And I'm talking about Alan Park here. Alan Park, I felt, was an honest witness who just made some honest observational mistakes. As we know, his comments about the Bronco on the street, he didn't notice it coming or going. He stated that he felt that there were 2 cars parked here. Well, he was wrong. There was only 1 car parked here. Arnell, my daughter, didn't return home till about 1 o'clock that night, and I can only assume that his mistake came about because he saw pictures of that the prosecution took when he was up in their office. I think Cato Kalin would tell you there were only 1 car parked here. I would go on to say that he was driving a stretch limo. Now, normally if there were 2 cars parked here correctly, you cannot get a stretch limo through my driveway. It's just a little too tight back there by the garage, and most limo drivers that come here, if they're driving a stretch, they have to back in on Ashford and then drive out of Ashford. This is a picture that the prosecution took of my car and my daughter's car as they were parked that morning. Now, you couldn't even get a normal car around that curve the way these 2 cars were parked. Another point I want to make about Alan Park, who once again I think was an honest witness. I just think he made a couple of honest observational mistakes. He was pretty vehement on the stand that the golf bag that we showed him in court was not the golf bag that I had. He did state that it was a Swiss Army knife golf bag, but this is not the bag, I think was his exact words, and he was pretty vehement about that. Well, Swiss Army knife only had a few golf bags. They had just recently sent me that golf bag as a gift. It's the only golf bag that Swiss Army makes. There's no other. There could have been no other. So here's a guy who felt that he observed some things. He was wrong. He had no axe to grind one way or the other. I just feel it was an honest mistake. He was not a detective. He was here just to pick up a customer and take him to the airport. And there's no reason for him to, be tested on his observational skills. And unfortunately, he made a few mistakes. Now, since we're outside, let's go back to what I thought was some of the more informative evidence that something funny went on during this investigation.
I want you to assume that perhaps at some time, since 1985 or 6, you addressed a member of the African American race as a nigger. Is it possible that you have forgotten that act on your part?
No, it's not possible.
Are you therefore saying that you have not used that word in the past 10 years, Detective Fuhrman?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
And you say on your oath that you have not addressed any black person as a nigger or spoken about black people as niggers in the past 10 years, Detective Fuhrman?
That's what I'm saying, sir.
So that anyone who comes to this court and quotes you as using that word in dealing with African Americans would be a liar, would they not, Detective Fuhrman?
Yes, they would.
All of them, correct?
All of them.
All right.
Was the testimony that you gave at the preliminary hearing in this case completely truthful?
I wish to assert my Fifth Amendment privilege.
Have you ever falsified a police report?
I wish to assert my Fifth Amendment privilege.
Is it your intention to assert your Fifth Amendment privilege with respect to all questions that I ask you?
Yes.
Detective Fuhrman, did you plant or manufacture any evidence in this case?
I assert my Fifth Amendment privilege.
And let me come back to Mark Fuhrman for a minute, just so it's clear. Did he lie when he testified here in this courtroom saying that he did not use racial epithets in the last 10 years? Yes. Is he a racist? Yes. Is he the worst LAPD has to offer? Yes. Do we wish that this person was never hired by LAPD? Yes. Should LAPD have ever hired him? No. Should such a person be a police officer? No. In fact, do we wish there were no such person on the planet? Yes.
Now we're going to walk down the alleyway, or I guess sidewalk, to the south of my house where Fuhrman supposedly found the glove. First thing I want to draw your attention to is there's a door here that goes into my garage that then goes in, you can go into my house that way. Obviously, if I had committed these murders and I was trying to get into my house undetected with a limo driver with an unobstructed view looking down my driveway, I could have gone through this door. The prosecution made a big deal about this door, saying there was a lot of stuff on the other side so that you couldn't get in this door, but as you can see, it opens outward, not inward. So it would have been no problem to go in there and negotiate some of the items that were on the other side if I wanted to get into my house that night. Now, as we walk down this walkway, you'll see there's a lot of debris, and I have old pavers here, some old bricks here. One thing that's very interesting, there was no blood drops detected anywhere along this walkway. Here, let's take time and look at another door. This door goes into my washroom, which is obviously inside my house. If you recall, Darden was making a big deal about some clothes that was in my washer, trying to imply they may have been mine, and in closer inspection we saw that there were panties and things. They were my daughter's Arnell's clothes, and of course that's another one of these theories or what they call Kodak moments in the trial that didn't go for the prosecution, that they thought with all that investigation they had figured something out. One thing you're going to see with all this dense foliage, it's a little thinner now than it was back then, that runs along the side of this house. There's a lot of berries. These berries from these Eugenia plants, they were all over the floor of this walkway. Once again, there was no blood going down here. You see the thickness of the foliage here. It would have been pretty difficult to come over this wall, this fence. If you take a good look at this fence also, you'll see that it's sort of tied off at the top. And it's pretty sharp here at the top, and you would think that anyone who was trying to come over this fence could have had some problems with hurting themselves on this wire. And of course there was no blood. You would imagine this person was covered in blood. There'd be some blood or some fibers or something there. Here we have this air conditioning unit, which we've heard a lot about. Once again, when I was talking about that A&E 2-hour special that I saw the other night on the trial, and Bill Curtis made a point there saying this was a unit that Cato Kalin heard 3 loud thumps from. Well, Cato Kalin at no time in this trial said that he heard 3 loud thumps from the air conditioning unit. Once again, that was one of Marcia Clark's theories. She said that. What Cato actually said, and he demonstrated when he was on the stand with the table in front of him, that he heard 3 loud bumps, sort of like that. Now, I don't know what that could have been. Maybe it was a signal. I have no idea. But he never said that he heard anyone hit this air conditioning unit. That was a theory of Marcia Clark's. Now, let's take a good look at this air conditioning unit. You can see there's some slats here. They face outward. It's head high. So one would think if anyone ran back here in the dark and ran into this unit, that they should have sustained some type of bruise, some type of injury. And of course, if they were bloodied and had blood on them, there should have been some fabric or some blood on that unit. Right down here, about 4 or 5 feet from this unit, is where they found, or where they claim to have found, the glove. One very interesting thing about that glove, there was no debris on it. There was a lot more here then than there is now. And one key thing about that glove, when Fuhrman saw it, he said it was still wet, it was thick. We did some experiments with that with experts, and they all told you that there was no possible way 7 hours later after this crime that glove could still have have blood on it, could still be wet and still be bloody. That was, I think, an experiment that I can't recall now if we really got it into evidence or not, but we know, and the public should know, that that was an experiment that was done, and it proved that that glove should have been dried by that time in the morning. Now, let's go around front again, and I'll show you some more interesting things. One other point I should say, once again, these berries that were here were also at Nicole's house. If someone walked out of that or walkway to the side of her house, and if they went into that Bronco, there should have been some debris, some leaves, some berries. The same should have been detected in my home. I have some very light carpeting, which I'm going to show you in a minute. If someone ran through here and then went right into my house and went up that carpeting, stepping on these berries, one would think there'd be some trace of that on this very light carpeting. Let's go around front. Before we go into my foyer and talk about more of the so-called blood evidence, Since we're out here, let me cover a few things that sort of came into the trial. That there was a little sarcasm about me hitting golf balls. Shortly after I got home, I would say 10 o'clock, a little after 10 o'clock, I came out here. I was actually looking for a sand wedge. I had recently got some new clubs, Callaway Big Bertha irons, and I didn't like their sand wedge, and I wanted to go back to my old Callaway sand wedge. I also wanted to change my 3-wood. I'd gone into my garage and I'd gotten an old 3-wood, Wood Brothers, sort of a custom-made club, even though the head was kind of beat up. I walked out here to my Bentley. I opened the trunk up where I had a lot of golf clubs, which the police had confiscated at some later time, and I couldn't find my sand wedge, and I took a pitching iron. I was looking for some balls. I play with a ball called Max Fly 100. I had no new Max Fly balls, even though I have a closet full of other balls that I'd never used. But I did have a couple of bags of balls in the trunk of my car, balls that I had already used. Normally I play 2 sleeves of balls per round of golf, so some of the balls that I would throw away, other people would think were great golf balls. I went through that bag and tried to pick some unscuffed balls. I picked about 5 or 6 unscuffed balls. I put them in a little bag that I had in the trunk of my car that had a windbreaker in it, a Hertz windbreaker in it. I put those balls in that bag. I took the pitching wedge and I took about 4 or 5 other balls, and I walked over here. I dropped the bag right around here, a bag incidentally we brought into the courtroom, but since Alan Park claimed he never saw that bag and couldn't identify it, Judge Ito wouldn't allow us to put it into evidence. But anyway, I brought 4 or 5 balls, scuff balls, drop them here. Normally I have a net here that my son Justin will hit balls into, and I do a lot of chipping around here. And I began to chip those 5 or 6 balls away. I chipped a couple of them over into the sand. I actually hit a full hit and hit one over this tree onto Mrs. Neverker's property, which is across Ashford. Curiously enough, the police found some golf balls the next day. You never saw that in evidence, though, but I saw it in one of their discovery property reports. They found some of those golf balls. I actually sculled one, hit some of the playground equipment, and I had recently gotten all the dents out of my car. I was cringing trying to figure out where that ball had gone. At that point, I walked back to my Bentley. I put the club back in my Bentley. I actually left both the white bag as well as the other bag down here. No one ever mentions that white bag. We'll get to that a little later. And I then walked out and looked into my back of my Bronco to see if I had any clubs there, and my dog was out. We ended up walking back into my Ashford gate, because I normally keep one of the gates on a hinge, and then I went into the house. Now, hitting golf balls took all of 2 minutes, all of about 2 minutes at the most, and I may have been outside between trying to find the club in the trunk of my car, being in my garage, picking balls that were unscuffed, coming over here, hitting golf balls, looking into my Bronco, and walking back into my house. No more than 10 minutes, that whole period of time.
And at the same time, he said almost simultaneously, he saw a person approximately 6 feet tall, 200 pounds, African American, wearing all dark clothing, walking at a good pace up the driveway. Now, at the same time that you saw Cato Kalin in the side yard, did you see anything else?
Yes, I saw a figure come down, well, not come down, but I saw a figure come into the entranceway of the house, just about where the driveway starts.
Can you show us on this diagram where you first saw that person?
Just, if you go where the circle is, you go straight back, no, the other way. A little bit farther. It was about there. Around that area.
As I walk down my driveway, as you can see, it's easy to see me. Alan Park testified on the stand that he had a view from the end of my garage right up here, actually to the front of my house. And This is, I guess, represents some of the biggest frustration I had, not only during the trial, but after the trial, when Marshall Clark tried to create some impressions that, fortunately, the jury didn't buy it. Unfortunately, the pundits bought it. They sold it to you, and a lot of people out there, I see in interviews that we do on Man on the Street, they ask this question. You notice that Ross Becker asked me, who was the shadowy figure that came across the driveway? Bill Curtis, who did a very fine 2 hours on A&E, even felt, I asked a question at one point about a shadowy figure coming down the driveway or across the lawn and entered the house. One guy even said, who was the guy Alan Parks saw climb the wall? The facts are, nobody, at no time I should say, did Alan Park indicate that he saw anybody climb the wall, come down a driveway, cross a lawn, or even come across the driveway. That was a figment of Marcia Clark's, in her mind, and she tried to sell that to you, and unfortunately a lot of you people bought that. What Alan Park testified to, that there was a person that was right about here. He put an X on an exhibit to prove it. Right here was where my golf bags were placed, where I walked out of my house, put my suit bag down, looked into my golf bag. When he was let into my property by Cato Kalin and they arrived here, right here was a suit bag, which Alan Park thought was a duffel bag. As we know now, it was a suit bag. Later on, you saw me on the plane and got off the plane with it, and my golf bag. That's all he saw. In the time he arrived here was 10:20. I guess he was here until after 11 o'clock. That is the only activity outside of my house that he witnessed. Now let's go inside.